Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. This is episode number 89, and today we welcome Maggie back from her experience last week at the red carpet in London. She got to attend the premiere of War of the Rohirrim, so we spent some time discussing and anticipating this film and, the adaptation there to come. Really, I have not seen it yet, so Maggie's seen it and I have not, so I'm going to be mostly asking questions with the rest of you here today, thinking through some of the things, and I'm interested in hearing your report. So how you doing, Maggie?
I'm okay. I'm still kind of riding the high, to be perfectly honest, because it was awesome, and I haven't done anything like that in a long time, so it's pretty great. But I feel like I should also just say I'm not in this to spoil anything for anyone, so it's not like I'm going to sit here and be like, and then this happens, and then this happens.
Right, right.
We just thought it would be kind of fun to talk about. Whoa, sorry, my dog just moved the table. We just thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about like what premieres are, what the culture around that is. I'm very happy to share stories and photos and ideas. And then I was also thinking, Corey, that we might want to just kind of chat a little bit about our future project, which we will likely announce tonight.
Yes.
And chat a little bit what we might want to think about going into that.
Yeah. Yes.
So we maybe lead with that, and that's kind of
Sure.
how Tuesday came to be. So when Corey and I were working on Rings and Realms, Rings of Power, obviously we knew we wanted the retrospective to happen and to widen our community and to bring more people into the studio to talk about this project, because so many different perspectives and ideas from the same material, and that just makes for such really interesting conversations. And we got talking to Kirsten Cairns from theonering.net. She's Green Dragon there, and we've had her on Other Minds and Hands before. And we were talking about doing a project together on War of the Rohirrim. So that is what our next adventure is going to be. So watch this space. Hopefully today, but it's probably not going to be till tomorrow. We're going to be launching a new Kickstarter for that project. So we're going to be making a 60 to 90 minute documentary. Let's be honest, it's probably going to be closer to 90.
Right. But it is going to be a different form. So the main difference between because it's totally different when we're talking about a film that is released and then we have time to think and process and plan through that. Rings and Realms, even in season 2, where we were able to do a lot more planning, it was still just an incredibly hectic schedule.
Yeah, that is such a relative term when you say a lot more planning. It means that we had like 36 more hours.
Right.
Than before. This we're going to have weeks.
Exactly. And it's one of the reasons why the format of Rings and Realms has been what it is, because like Maggie and I have some time to think through what we want to say, and the team has some time to think through, like Ben and the studio team have time to think through the environments and things that we want to be in while we're talking and stuff, and sometimes some extra fun things, but what we don't have is time to edit, really
script and review.
Yeah, I mean, and we did script them this year, but again, it's the difference between I'm trying to get out what I want to say, and I am writing it out first so that I'm not spontaneously making it up when I'm in front of the camera like I did in season 1. But anyway, we weren't really able to plan the entire production. And since this is something where we're gonna be able to see the film, and then we're gonna have actually weeks in which to kind of think through and plan, the idea is to be able to do something much more like a documentary and less like, the kind of the Rings and Realms is like pretty cool talking head video, but in the end we're just talking, right? And
that was very much kind of the ambition of the studio too, is to diversify what we're able to provide and produce. So we have kind of shown we can do the talking head thing. We have loved developing that and playing with that, and we will continue to develop and play with that, especially since it looks like season 3 is coming, and we know there's other projects in the pipeline around that. But we really wanted to try to do something different. So this will still be Rings and Realms, but Rings and Realms War of the Rohirrim, and a documentary. So instead of multiple 40 to 60 minute episodes that are a bit ad hoc. This is going to be very edited, very structured, very
Right.
produced. Our segments might play into each other more thematically. We'll have more thoughtful cutaways because we'll have time to read each other's scripts before things happen, so we're pretty excited about it. So anyway, so that's the big project that we're starting to work on, and that Kickstarter is going to launch in the next couple of days. And the idea is that we'll film in January, and release the documentary to our backers, and then also potentially, if we hit stretch goals, to have a ton of other content coming out as well, because there's a lot of other things we want to do anyway,
Right.
not just documentary. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's that project. But that started with a conversation with Kirsten Cairns, OneRing.net, and we were talking about this potential partnership. And then she kindly asked if I wanted to be her +1 at the premiere in London. I was like, obviously, yes, please. I would love to see the film weeks before, especially when I'm doing visual analysis. I am not going to have access to the film, so like
Right.
trying so hard to like wrap my head around what I'm going to be looking at and how I might actually be able to do that without owning the film. It's like as many times as I can view it, the better. So I said yes, and then last minute she couldn't make it for a scheduling conflict. She was coming in the next day for a press junket, and then asked if I would cover red carpet for One Ring, and I was going to be there anyway for Rings and Realms, and made sense. So here we are. I got to work the red carpet, which was surreal, because I did do red carpet with Twilight, but that was in a very different capacity. Like that was as a gimmick with Nokia. Like they gave me their new phone to cover things and advertise. This was literally part of the press corps. Like I had the Guardian on one side and the Sun on the other, and a little sign in front of me that said the OneRing.net. And of course, everybody in this cast and crew knows the OneRing.net. They are the originals. Like they're the OGs,
Yeah.
So Peter Jackson was beelining over to me. He was like, One Ring. I'm like, Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson. So,
That's my favorite picture. Like, it's a,
I'll see if I can-
saw that picture of Maggie standing next to Peter Jackson, and my favorite part of it, Maggie, not gonna lie, my favorite part is your expression where you look a little bit like someone has just hit you in the head with a club.
Well, you're not entirely wrong there. I will have a bunch of pictures going up on Ring.net, but you'll see on my socials and Rings and Realms socials that we've posted at least that picture up. But
Yes.
yeah, and I told Kirsten, I was like, I'm very happy to share all this content with you, but I need to edit out me asking questions because I'm a blubbering idiot a few of the times. But I can't tell you how refreshing that was too, because so often you just get wrapped up in the work that you have to do, and I mean that in the best way because we love our work, but you get wrapped up in the work, and it's been so long since I got to fangirl, and it was fantastic. Like the whole experience was just delightful because it's an event, and like I got into studying event films because of the vibe. Like if you guys have ever gone to like a live music event or tailgated before a football game or waited in a queue for your favorite concert, like whatever it is, it's that kind of energy. Or like races, if you go to cheer somebody on in a marathon, like that kind of hype, it's just so, I don't know, it's like a drug. You just get so excited about it. It's so wrapped up in the energy. And there were so many people there that were so passionate. And it has been a long time since we've had a Peter Jackson's World film. So they all came out. It was like a little reunion.
Right.
Kate Blanchett was there, Ian McKellen was there, Andy Serkis was there. I didn't talk to the three of them, but I did get to talk to Peter Jackson, Philippa Boyens, Billy Boyd, Dominic Monaghan, and then the new cast for this, Gaia Wise is voicing Hera. Stephen Gallagher, who, by the way, gave me his email address and was like, I want to come on your show. So we'll be talking to Stephen at some point. He's the composer, and he's also the music editor for the Hobbit films.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and just such a nice guy. I think I had 7.5 minutes of content talking to him because we just got into it very quickly. And I had 2 to 3 minutes with everybody else. They were so warm and open and happy to have a conversation and very generous in their answers. It didn't feel like just media lines, which of course they had some media training beforehand, I'm sure, and they had some talking points to make sure they kept to the line. But yeah, they were really lovely, and nothing prepares you for being told, we're bringing Peter to you next, and Philippa Boyne's beelining to you to talk about this. So I was mad. It was mad.
Yeah.
But it was delightful. So it was thanks to Kirsten and her inability to make it that I got to do this. And then we went inside and screened the film. And that was also fantastic because it was, some top tier content creators and some diehard fans and contest winners and cast and crew, family and friends. It was just a really enthusiastic, excited, informed audience.
Nice.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Nice. That is one thing I will say. Like, I have always found it really interesting to the few times that I've been able to be involved in a screening, like an advanced screening with that kind of crowd, right? With people involved in the project, with, other people who are really kind of like, kind of plugged in and tuned in to what's going on. And the reactions are just sort of different than when you're, in a regular theater. It's
Totally.
It's fascinating to
and I love it for
experience.
like all those different reasons too. I remember going to see the last Harry Potter, and the first time I saw it was in Leicester Square when they rented out all of the cinemas in Leicester Square, which is something like 37 screens total. Mm-hmm. And it was all family and friends. So anybody that had ever worked on the Harry Potter films got to bring their family and friends to go watch the final movie together.
Right.
And cast and crew and producers were jumping from screen to screen to just say thank you to these people. And my friend Jen worked on the film, so I got to go along with her. And it was dead silent. Everyone was so respectful, and they waited through the credits and applauded at the end, and it was just wonderful. The first time I saw it on like opening nights, it was the second time I had seen it, was LeakyCon 2011 in Orlando, Florida. So at the fan convention,
right.
At midnight, at the cinema with the biggest Harry Potter fans on the planet.
Right.
I didn't hear a single word. Everyone was screaming through the whole thing and weeping and crying and falling over in the aisles. So I was grateful for both experiences, but I was glad that I could hear the story the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, cool.
It was very cool. I like the energy of both and what you get from that. But
so
Christopher just pointed out Nubetta was there too. Yeah, Nubetta was there. He got to join the core fan content creators. Don Marshall was there. Lauren does cosplay, a few other folks. And it was neat. I mean, they got to do some pretty unique things. They went to an anime drawing class and archery lesson and all sorts of things, just kind of get them involved in the process of the film. But.
Cool. Well, that's neat. So was there anything that, like, during, the conversations you were able to have on the red carpet, so anything from that, like, of your conversations with the crew and cast that you would sort of want to share that you found interesting as far as, the kinds of things that we are often asking about and interested in the...
Yeah, I mean, and just in terms of, like, how to engage too. So they have handlers that come through first that work for the press community, and they're kind of asking what kinds of things are you interested in. Do you want cast, crew? And I said, I want to talk to anybody, but we are very much focused on story and adaptation. So I'd be very interested in talking to producers and writers and production, as well as anybody else. So they kind of knew that coming over to me, that we were interested in that. And I feel like that did make a difference because they wanted to have a chat about it. So
right.
It started with conversations about filling the gap. And it was so quickly evident that was the easy question because they're all like, oh, this is just the best. And same kind of thing what you're talking about, like we're grounding it in something we know, two
right.
paragraphs about, this historic moment. And those 2 paragraphs made for an over 2-hour film. So it was just very rich fodder. And Philippa Boyens was the first one to say, we thought it would be a more of a challenge. And the story just very easily came out. And naturally, Hera brought them where they wanted to go. And so that was kind of neat to hear them talk about the process of she kind of filled the story gaps in for them. And it was a big team of writers. So they all, worked together in these things, but primarily 2. And the 2 of them developed this story. And then they said, well, we had Philippa to fill in the gaps because she knows everything. So it sounded like they were kind of developing the ideas, and then it was backed up by her. But that was nice of being aware of where it came from and feeling secure in that. but how that kind of also gave them a total freedom because Hera's story wasn't written. They could create that. That opportunity between spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, there is a clear creative appeal in the fill in the blanks version of adaptations, right? Where you have all the fun of engaging in this world, the world which itself sort of exists outside of, your own creation, right? And where you, even as a filmmaker or whatever, can sort of do your, fan thing, right? In investing in that world. And yet you have freedom to be able to tell the story that you want to tell within, some parameters, but still with a substantial amount of freedom, which is very different from when you're doing a retelling of the story, and every single moment, every single choice that you make, every scene that you depict is going to be, matching up with, or more likely not matching up with, the mental picture of everyone who's read the book and everyone who's read the story. And I am not at all surprised to hear that they're enjoying being there.
And the parameters element, I think, was really interesting because, we commented on a lot how they were really hanging their hat on Peter Jackson's trilogy and how annoying that was. And it wasn't once we got started. So that was also nice to have everybody kind of acknowledge that we're going back to Peter Jackson's version of Middle-earth.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like it was slavish to that.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite conversation was the one with Stephen Gallagher, the composer. And I said, how influenced were you by Peter Jackson's world? Because obviously you've spent a lot of time in it as he did the Hobbit film.
Living in the shadow of Howard Shore. Yeah.
Exactly. Living in the shadow of Howard Shore. And obviously they want some recollection of this music to match previously known music. You don't want it to be totally out of character if we're in the same world. And he was like, well, yeah, we had a lot of fun with that. You'll recognize some of the themes, but they're not overplayed. They're fairly rarely brought out, like the Rohirrim theme, things like that.
Yeah.
And it's definitely at the beginning, it's definitely at the end. There's not like a constant throughout. But he did things like took Eowyn's theme and inverted it to make Hera's theme. So we have kind of a recollection of Eowyn through Hera, and it's a nice little nod,
Right.
So I quite liked the parameters of Jackson's world being where we're playing, but not being totally restricted by it either. Which is what adaptation thrives in, when you have awareness, but you get creativity.
Right. Yeah, cool. So
Cool.
Thoughts about the film itself? Like, what were some of the things that if we're, kind of doing some pre-gaming and thinking about what we want to make sure we discuss and talk about, what are some of the kind of highlights of sort of issues or themes or, again, I don't mean even like reviewing stuff, but just what are some of the things that jumped out at you? As I know you and I have had this discussion so many times before when we watched Rings of Power episodes together in planning for the show, to be like, oh, this is like, we totally need to talk about that. We totally need to talk about that. What are some of the things that really jumped out at you that we should talk about?
Yeah, I will say I definitely want to talk review, but not until after you and everybody else has seen it, just because I think there's some really interesting stuff story and character-wise that I want to flesh out with people. But this ain't the place to do that. Thematically and like big picture stuff, the visuals, the sound design, the color palette, like there's so many just like storytelling elements that are done visually through this that I can't wait to start playing around with. And my favorite part of Rings of Power and preparing for episodes of Rings and Realms with you and Ben was doing this with you. And everybody kind of, like, just so you guys know, the first time we watched it was together without anybody talking or taking any notes. And then we would watch it again and talk the whole way through it and pause it often and discuss stuff. So the first viewing feels like just taking it in. The second viewing is tearing it apart in a good way. So, like, I'm looking forward to that part because there's stuff that I notice, like visual structure and color palette, that you'll be like, oh, well, that's because, and all of a sudden our worlds collide and you see this bigger picture thing. So I'm really looking forward to digging into some of that, so you can kind of fill in the blanks with the story, and I can tell you a little bit about why we think we're seeing it that way. So like the visual palette of Rohan is warm and rich and really earthy tones that just kind of scream medieval story to me. And then you compare that to when they go to Helm's Deep and everything's super snowy and icy and everything's gray and grim, and you physically feel cold because the colors on the screen are so cold. And just doing that kind of comparative analysis, I think, is going to be a lot of fun to see where we see light coming from. Is it cold? Is it warm? How does that play into character development? We're going to have fun. Thematically, I think...
So it is picking up on some of those things we were noticing about, say, in the tapestry, part of which is behind you, right? That when we were because that was one of the first things that struck us, right? Was the whole warm and cold alternation and combination, the fire and the even in the battle scenes, with some with the fire and some with the ice. So that was definitely something that you felt was playing out very persistently.
Yeah, and how they use it, like the flames for the bad guys were green most of the time, and that's got to mean something. I want to play around with that. How often do we see that? I didn't start to really notice it until 2/3 of the way in, and I was like, oh wait, was that happening the whole time? And I missed that. So how was that introduced? What does the green signify? And is it consistent throughout? Where else do we see it? Is a seed being planted elsewhere that I should notice that green flame? That kind of idea, I think, will be interesting to check out.
Okay, green flame. See, now I feel like immediately running upstairs and asking my son about that. Like, green fire in anime, is that a thing? Like, what's up with tell me about fire colors, because it's exactly the kind of thing where, again, if what you're looking for is just purely, sort of naturalistic animation, right? Fire is not normally green. Like, that doesn't usually happen, right? And yet that's exactly the kind of thing that you will... I mean, again, anime is not always just about... It's not about just representation.
Right.
There are different things that it's conveying. Very interesting.
And we do have different people on the Signum staff and community that are anime specialists. So I think we should bring Annie and Robert into an episode after everybody's seen it to talk through it.
Yeah.
Because I think there is some stuff like that. And I mean, there's certainly things with camera movement and the lens. Like, anime and animation is just such a different lens to tell this story through, because the same rules don't apply. Like, yes, you can have a drone shot and you can see how an eagle would fly, but it's going to be different than how an eagle would fly. Right. So watching that scene where the camera actually puts us in the eagle's eye is nuts. And to the point that it was kind of overwhelming. I really was like, I'm getting a little sick. Like, just hold back. But what an interesting storytelling device. And
right.
It helped build tension, too, of like, the eagles were not an easy anything. They weren't an easy relationship with Hera. They weren't an easy animation, because that was intense, but it also just helped build that relationship, because we can see that isn't a simple thing, that Hera just has this friendship with eagles. Like, no, that's hard won. That was a tricky thing to manage, and she does it, and the camera kind of helps us feel that. It was very cool. And I do think there's a ton of thematics that we're going to get to play with when you think about, like, friendship and sacrifice and duty, all these things. And some of them I think they pulled off really well. There's a few that I really struggled with how they told that. So I'll look forward to talking about that as well.
Yeah, duty is one of the ones that I'm coming. There's several that I'm coming. It's hard because on the one hand, like, I don't want to be forcing, be like, I'm going to assume this is a theme, and so I'm going to go in looking for it all the time. Because if you look, if one of the rules in interpretation is if you go in looking for something, you'll find it, right? And that's not always a good thing, right? Because it doesn't mean it's necessarily there, or it's the anyway.
I mean, there's certain things we always look for in Tolkien's work anyway. I think there's certain known themes that we can be aware of.
Well, and certainly,
and the more we learned about this adaptation, there's certain things are going to be discussed.
For sure. Yeah, some of the things that they've been pointing to in the trailers and in the other material is stuff that I feel I've been instructed, to be looking for. And duty is one of those that is on my short list of ones I'm really interested to see how they handle. The entire question of, again, I'm thinking of that tapestry with that first scene of Hera in between the two opposing forces and this, and her as like this pawn, being used as a political pawn as women so often were, right? And then, immediately after that, her breaking out on her own and everything. And how is she going to be, what is her relationship with her duty? How is her duty going to be defined? How is her relationship with that duty going to be established and developed over the course of the film? It's one of the things that I'm interested to sort of see how they handle it.
And to compare it to the text and the lore, because you're obviously going to be able to fill in some gaps for me on that. So, what would the expectation be from our known knowledge of these dynamics? And would there be any space where you could have an independent daughter not follow her father's desires and, all these kinds of things that... Because Helm I found really interesting as a character, and I want to know if that is based off of what you would have expected from what we know from the text, or if that is an invention that serves this film.
Yeah, so, I mean...
Very different things in my brain right now.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, and I can say in general, like, as far as what we know about Helm personally is very little. I mean, the primary thing that we can... The primary basis for drawing conclusions about Helm's personality is, like, the one speech that he gives when he punches Freyka out at the beginning. And there's some things we can definitely conclude about Helm's. I mean, one speech doesn't sound like much, and it isn't. It's certainly, one is not as confident in drawing conclusions as one is when one has a larger body to draw from. But still, there's some fairly indicative things, right? And of course, whenever you have a story told in brief like that, when Tolkien is telling a just a couple paragraph story, it gives the particular things that are mentioned more weight. Right, because, those are the only words of Helm's that he's given us, but that makes them particularly weighty because he chose those to give us. Right? He did give them to us, and so therefore, that is significant. Anyway, so there are some things that we can conclude about Helm and his character from that. There are sort of a few more things that we can conclude from some of the circumstances, like what we're told he does and how we're told that he responds to things. We can draw some conclusions about his character, but it's
and those things
it's
I
hard.
think are pretty darn clear.
Yeah.
In the film. Like, his reactions to things are what you would expect them to be. Yeah.
Yes.
But there were other things, especially with the relationship with his daughter and the relationship with his adversaries.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be an interesting one to compare notes on, and how he acts on that.
Yep.
Some of the rules of the world building. You know how we talk a lot about world building, and you can do anything you want if it's believable within that space. And
Yep.
there were a few things that to me were not believable within that space. So that's one of the things that I'm like, is that context, or is that them trying too hard to make something fit within the known lore? Or a writer's room decision that just didn't play out as we thought it would. There's so many different ways that can kind of fall, and I could feel differently about it than you do. So
right.
I like that stuff. Like, we feel differently about the same thing. How does that happen? Where does that come from?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that'll be fun to play with.
No, that'll be very interesting. So, I mean, thinking about Hera, you were talking about the daughter's relationship with her duty and stuff, that kind of issue. One of the things that to me is so interesting about the choice to make Hera the protagonist of this story is the relationship that it offers with the Eowyn story in The Lord of the Rings, right? There is one angle from which the choice of, Hera, the unnamed daughter in the text, and choosing her and spotlighting her as the protagonist of the whole story, there's one angle from which that makes perfect logical sense. And that angle is from a Lord of the Rings perspective. that I don't think it's very controversial to say that at the very least I'm not going to say one of, the most compelling story of from the Rohirrim elements of the Lord of the Rings is Éowyn's story. Like, everybody focuses on Éowyn's story. Everyone, not everyone loves it to the same extent. I mean, some people don't like it, some people do like it. But everyone is interested in it, right? It is just like...
It has a lot going on.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there, and there's a lot to think about, and a lot to be... And Tolkien was clearly interested in it. It's a story that grew, right? And choosing Hera as the protagonist gives them an opportunity to sort of look at elements of that story, and think about them in some slightly different contexts and from some slightly different perspectives, right? So we see, we have one example of how one, well, I almost said daughter, not quite daughter, but again, like, so there are the circumstances of Éowyn's, like the parameters of Éowyn's own personal story, right, that are idiosyncratic to Éowyn. And there's also, of course, larger narrative elements of like the role that Éowyn plays in the larger story as a whole, right? And it's a really interesting kind of what if to say, okay, let's take a similar kind of situation in the sense of like, let's look at a daughter of the Rohirrim, right? Let's look at it at, a sort of a would-be shield maiden of the Rohirrim, who is going to face some like parallel circumstances, right? Like there will be things that will be parallel in the circumstances, and in the dynamics between her and her male guardians and male king guardians, right? But there are also some differences, right? So it's not just, you're not just doing it, rolling out the same exact story again. There's enough differences that it gives you a chance to run it through differently, right? I mean, it's like, to put it in a really, put it in like a data analysis standpoint. It's like you take a scenario and you run a computer simulation of what would happen in that scenario if you change just a couple of the factors, right? And you run those and see, like, now, how is that going to impact things, right? How would that change things? And it really, I think, so it's not just a direct, close comparison. Again, like the retelling situation where, before in the Peter Jackson films, there's all of this, there's a sense in which Peter Jackson's Éowyn, in the original films, didn't have like the freedom to be able to like be her own story, right? Because everyone's just like book Éowyn, movie Éowyn, right? Like you can't get out of that matrix, right? This kind of a situation enables you to say, like, okay, let's think of some of these same things, but let's do this in a different scenario. And I think that in a lot of ways, to me, a close comparison between Tolkien's Éowyn and Hera in the film is going to be really interesting. That's one of the things that I'm most excited to do and to think about, is how are they picking up on, because it's not the same. They're not just retelling the story, right? But how do they deal with some of these same dynamics? The expectations that are placed on everybody, like the warrior culture of the Rohirrim and how honor and duty is defined within that context. That's one thing that Éowyn verbally like she talks about struggling with that, right? And then within that context, the expected role of a woman, and the expected role of a daughter, within that context. Those are all things that are in play, that are in discussion in the Éowyn situation, and those are clearly, they must come up again, right, in this story.
And something like, I'm glad you brought up all those little bits, because it's something that I've never really dug deep into or like written a paper about, but I've always been curious about. Like, Tolkien was exploring these ideas. Tolkien, an upper crust white dude from Oxford, was exploring the dynamics of a woman and her different feelings and the different roles and the different spaces that she could occupy. Like, that's real interesting to me, just in terms of like creation standpoint, and then in terms of a character, watching that play out in these different spaces, and then many, many, many decades later, being able to have a Hera who facilitates the strains in those different roles, and we get to see a creation based off of something that he only mused on. That we have one reference point, but here's a totally created,
Yeah.
unique space to play with those ideas, and how they did it too, because it's there's not going to be a perfect way. We're talking about a character, and a character should be flawed to be believable. So there's things that happen with this character that I don't like,
Right.
but there's things that happen with people in my life that I don't like. That's how things become believable,
Right.
So it was really interesting to watch some of that play out. And there are some very predictable elements, because it really does follow like a total hero's journey kind of framework. But how they mess around with the different pools of duty and like even relationship stuff, like how her attachment to her father drives her motivations, and how his attachment to her drives his motivations, was not something I expected. So the different family relationships that we kind of saw introduced with Eowyn have a deeper space to play out, because they're not as tied to what we have. We have a lot more freedom to play with it, so they do. And it was really interesting. So yeah, I think that will be a lot of fun to talk about that. And the Shield Maiden idea as a whole, there are 3 major women in this story, one of which I don't want to dig into until you've seen it, because I have thoughts. But Olwen, who we see in the trailer as her kind of caretaker, mentor woman, is just a phenomenal character. And being able to have Hera play off of Olwen, I thought was one of the strengths of this film, because it just showed these dynamics and these relationships that we haven't been able to see. Like, talk about the Bechdel test. Like, yeah,
Well,
slammed it.
See, that by itself is really interesting, because Eowyn has no one. She is a woman alone. Like, there is.
Well, have you seen that meme that circulates every couple of months, where it's like, take a look at the scenes in The Lord of the Rings where the women talk to each other about something not involving a man, and it cuts straight to the credits? Because there isn't one.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have to admit, like, I'm not a big fan of the Bechdel test, and I get it. And it's valuable in its ways. I dislike it in a lot of ways, because, like, Jane Austen fails the Bechdel test in a lot of ways, and that annoys the crap out of me.
Because they're always talking about men.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, like in my opinion, Jane Austen shows that the Bechdel test is deeply flawed, and I don't accept it as a valid thing.
Yeah, and
but
in
any case,
and you shouldn't use it as like the be all end all.
Yeah,
but what that does is point out there are terrible women characters in most films. Like,
yes.
That's kind of
I agreed. I'm not saying it's entirely without value. That's always my kind of.
Oh no, but I agree with you. It's a flawed test. It should not be.
But in any case, but you're right. And the thing is, this is one of the things. Actually, speaking of Jane Austen, just like Jane Austen, almost never. There's like fewer than 5 scenes in all of Jane Austen's novels where she depicts 2 men talking to each other with no women around. That almost never happens in Jane Austen's novels. Tolkien almost never depicts 2 women talking to each other with no men around. And I kind of suspect that those 2 things are for the same reason. Because they're writing what they know, right? Like, Jane Austen does not know how men talk to each other when women are not around, and she doesn't pretend to guess at what that's like. And Tolkien has very little experience with that either. Anyway, that's my own personal suspicion as to why they tend not to include a lot of scenes like that. But Eowyn, it's not only Eowyn. We don't see Eowyn like in private conversation with other women. There are literally no women in her life, as far as we know, right? I mean, like, it's...
Well, and we assume there are. I mean, this is
Probably.
A whole culture. Yeah, this is a whole culture and community. Like, I'm sure there are, but like all these other things we talk about, through lines and lenses, and what drives the story in this world are not those characters.
Yeah.
So they don't get to feature. Whereas in this story, they do drive these characters. And I don't think Kirsten would mind me sharing this, but she and I got into a really good conversation about the strong female trope, which we're going to have to do a whole show on at some point. But it was really refreshing because we were talking about why Hera doesn't fit that in a really lovely creative way. Like, it looks like you have a strong female lead. Like, I'm saying that in air quotes.
Right.
It looks like you have a strong female lead. Like, oh God, they cast the lead as a
Right.
woman. Like, obviously, strong female lead. No, like we have a woman character leading this story, but she's not strong by just replacing the male characteristics. She has her own entire core of ability and skills that are very bespoke to her and feminine. I mean, she's all about speed and cunning and
Right.
using her brain, stuff like that, that she can outsmart and outspeed these men. But she's not stronger than them. She's not throwing horses down and, things like
Right.
that.
Right.
And yeah, now I'm thinking about a certain scene that, again, we'll talk about later. But
Right.
there's stuff where you're like, how did that? Oh, okay. But it was nice to see this strong female lead push back against that. We have a strong female lead because she's a really well developed, interesting character,
Right.
not because she's taking the place of a central role, not because she's the lead.
Right. Right. No, as I say, I think I'm really interested to see it, especially since, as I say, it is to me highly defensible given the centrality of Eowyn's role in readers' experience of the Lord of the Rings, right? Again, it's not to say that she's the central character in Rohan. She's not. There's Theoden, there's Aemir. Like, that's all really important, and she plays no role at all in the battle. She's not at the Battle of Helm's Deep. She's, but nevertheless, like, again, in readers' experience, Eowyn really looms large, and so to be able to say, okay, let's lean into that, with the. It did have the Eowyn story frame. I don't want to. I know I want to get into review stuff because we haven't seen it yet and everything. But what was your one question that I have about that I think you can answer without getting too spoilery or anything like that? How like heavy? How much freight is that frame carrying?
I think I know what you're getting at.
Yeah. Like, is it just a
We
little
were-
tag and then we forget about it, or
I was worried it was going to feel gimmicky. That was my concern, that it was
like
and I
showing
think-
the film clips at the beginning of the trailers?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, we get it. You're tying it to the modern
Right.
world. Huh?
Right.
But because the story was so shaped by the role of shield maidens, it was really quite lovely because she was introducing it as if she were talking to other modern, into her time, shield maidens. And let me tell you a story of the stories of past. And I don't even think she said it, but like we quickly inferred that this is only passed down by word of mouth. So maybe that's why we don't have any stories of Hera, because they're not written down. We
Yeah.
only get them from other shield maidens. And
Yes.
that was really cool. Like, all of a sudden we were at the circle around the fire.
Right.
And it didn't feel, they never said like, I am Eowyn, daughter of, it was just her
Right.
voice just telling us a story. And it didn't focus on her at all. It just very quickly got into Hera's story. So only if you recognize the voice will that attach anything to it, which all of us obviously do. And we all read the articles. We know it's Miranda Otto. But that's kind of lovely because that's a nice way to latch it to the world that we know with Peter Jackson without it being totally gimmicky. And it did end with her as well. I'm like trying to remember, but it did end with her as well. But it didn't feel in any way forced, which I appreciated.
Okay. And no, I mean, of course I understand the concern, and obviously their own choices in the trailers really raised the concern about gimmicky connections and things. But that from a storytelling perspective and from a relationship with the text perspective, I love that concept of a frame. To take the very choice, like specifics aside, like specifics of Eowyn and the War of the Rohirrim aside, to take the notion of we're going to tell stories, isolated stories from earlier in the history of Middle Earth, and we're going to set them within a sort of a storytelling frame, right? This idea of the stories of old being handed down, which is itself a sort of a minor theme that runs through the Lord of the Rings, right? From Bilbo at the beginning learning Sam his letters, all the way to Bilbo handing the books to Frodo, and then Frodo handing the book to Sam at the end and saying the last pages are for you, and Aragorn keeping alive the memory of the of the ancient days that are gone. All of these, this is a thing in Tolkien's world. It's a low key theme in the story. Of course, the Stairs of Cirith Ungol, right, with Frodo and Sam imagining their story being read out of a book with red and black letters someday. Again, there are lots of times where this kind of comes up, and so the choice of that sort of concept, right? We're going to it's the way in which one of the things. It's the way in which it differs. Sorry, I'm processing a couple different things here. Thinking of the MCU for a second, a lot of people use the MCU as a way to assuming that that's the only way, in a sense, to do multiple. So people keep talking about Middle Earth, cinematic universe, and are they going to do the MCU with Tolkien stuff and everything? I think that's in a lot of ways actually it's not a very thoughtful way even to talk about the MCU. Frankly, the MCU thing, what the MCU did, and I love it. I'm very interested in it, right, is to say, okay, we're going to take the medium of the feature film, but we're going to make each feature film a chapter in a large and interrelated story, right? So that the whole story that we're telling is this big picture story, and we're going to be telling it, bit by bit and chapter by chapter in different films. That's a really interesting approach to storytelling, and I love it, but it's not the only one, right? And this idea of saying, no, because what you lose in the MCU approach is history, right? You can jump backwards, and they've tried, the MCU has tried a couple times, like with the Black Widow film, which was like jumping backwards. But that's awkward. It's because it's not how this... By default, from the beginning, the MCU storyline was proceeding, in a basically chronological order. So it's very different, but quite cool to say, no, the framework of we are going to tell a series of interrelated film stories. Yeah. But the framework of those is going to be that storytelling theme, right? That is there in the Lord of the Rings. And we're going to avail ourselves of that to say, no, as these stories continue to be handed down, they're being handed down to you, and they are all part of the story. But it's quite a different dynamic and a different approach to big picture storytelling.
Totally. And it works so well with this because I don't think we're as locked in. We don't have as much content as MCU right now. We have the 6 Peter Jackson films. Really? I mean, I know there's a few other adaptations we can talk about, but in the common tongue,
right.
And in Peter Jackson's world, these are the 6 that we have. So having this fit in with that makes sense because the visuals and the production is such a departure as well. You don't want it to be a total departure immediately. For our first thing out of the Jackson vision to be completely left field would be exciting. I mean, I would love to talk about that. I think that'd be a lot of fun to see how they made it so different. But for the first thing to kind of be a transition that we're going to still create a frame that you're familiar with. We're going to have some visuals, Helm's Deep looks exactly as you expect it to.
Right.
We're going to have a few audio cues with music that are going to be familiar to you. We're even going to have a couple of voices cameo in that you might recognize. That didn't feel gimmicky either. It was fun. It was nice to be in that space again. But then I can see, and here's a scoop from Peter Jackson, he was talking about the different visions that were coming. You can see that it would go to other spaces. And we're aware of that. We know Warner Brothers has the catalog, and we know they're working on Hunt for Gollum, so we know it's going different places and different stories. And talking to Peter Jackson, I said, how excited are you to be back in this world through a different visual medium? And he was like, well, we couldn't come back to Middle Earth and just do the same thing. I didn't want it to just be the same thing I've been doing. I can't wait to give these opportunities to other artists to envision it in their own way And that immediately got Star Wars visions in my head of like, oh,
Right.
that would be so fun if we could see all these different ways. And then he said something along the lines, I'd have to go back and watch the clip, but something along the lines of, we've got Hunt for Gollum coming out, and that's going to be like a psychological thriller. I was like, what? What? So
Hunt for Gollum is going to be a
just
psychological thriller.
yeah, like just knowing that they're thinking about not just different frameworks, but different like ways to tell the story. We're not just going to have a PG 13 listen to the story. We're going to have Gollum as a psychological thriller? Tell me
So,
more.
for some reason, this just the picture that conjured in my head is the idea of like the Hunt for Gollum in like the style of the Blair Witch Project.
Or something along. See, I was picturing more like The Fugitive, which just
Right.
made me laugh. But,
Right.
Gollum at the end of like a concrete tube being like, I didn't kill my. No. But I
Yeah.
mean, it was genuinely exciting. Whereas I can feel the eyes rolling of a lot of other people as they hear statements like that. But from an adaptation standpoint, that's really exciting to think about how you can tell a story in a different way. It's not going to change the original for me. I'm still going to love the content that we came from, but I'm going to enjoy watching other artists try to tell the story in this unique way.
Yeah.
And if we get a Gollum story that's thrilling and, maybe PG-13 R rated because it's more tension, that's cool.
It is cool, and that's what and that's of course the thing that I was excited about in seeing that this was going to be not just animated but done by a Japanese anime studio from the beginning. It's like cool, like let's get that kind of a different vision. Let's do a very different kind of storytelling and see how
And I
that
think
goes.
that'll be a lot of fun to take a look at too, just the different styles. Like visually, as reviews start to come out, I'm sure you'll see a lot of mixed messages and mixed reviews. But the one thing I have seen pretty consistently is how striking the visuals are. And I agree, they were astounding, absolutely spectacular. And we've seen it already in the stills that they've released. But just the animation too, some of the layers, how they mix like real world imagery with the flat anime style animation and how that can tell a story because it's making you focus on a different element of the scene than a film would. If something is very visually striking in the background, you're going to focus in on that and not the bland faces in the front. So what am I supposed to be looking at in the back? Oh my God, there's an eagle back there, and like all of a sudden you're drawn to this other thing. And what a neat technique to bring somebody's focus into that.
Yeah. No, that's definitely going to be interesting. Other of those kind of general impressions that you had from seeing the film.
Color palette is one. I'm looking forward to seeing it again with that as my focus. I mean, obviously, I'm going to see it like another 6 or 7 times if we're
Right.
going to be making a documentary about it. Probably more. But color palette is one I really want to start to think about because as an animation, a ton of thought went into that. So, what is the color palette of Rohan? Is it different when we're in Edoras than when we're in Helm's Deep? What are they wearing and what does that mean? Going through this banner that you and I went through, the costumes now mean something totally different to me than what we speculated from that poster. So now I want to go back and take a look at that
Right.
and see how that plays out. So I think my next viewing is going to be focusing completely on color and how that's used. But thematically, I think it will also be fun for us to look at themes like sacrifice. It's a word that kept coming up in my mind when I was watching this, and we kind of know some ideas of what that means with regard to Tolkien.
Yes.
We've seen that play out in Jackson's a fair bit, and I'd like to bring some of that into our thoughts of what that might mean with Hera
Yes.
and Helm.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Helm. I was thinking of that in particular. I mean, it's a really interesting. Because one could easily make the argument from the text that Helm's death is not a sacrifice, and yet it would be really easy to make it one if one were actually filling in the story more than we get very little about the actual circumstances of his death there, and even thinking about what we were talking about the retelling of stories, right? You get the impression from reading Appendix A that there are these stories. I think Tolkien does a great job of giving us a glimpse. He's not just writing an objective history, right? When we get the story of Helm Hammerhand, we get the juicy bits, right? We get the bits that people hand down and probably exaggerate, right? And, and kind of fixate on. And we don't get a rounded and balanced story of King Helm, right? And his career and his troubles and everything else. Like, that's not what Tolkien is trying to give us. But anyway, yeah, I think it's, I think that's it. So when you are really settling down with it and filling that out into a full story, what Tolkien wrote is not a full story. It's, sensational anecdotes from the life of Helm in support of a general overview of the, what do you call it? Dynastic history, right, of Rohan.
And along with that, I feel like the politics are going to be a lot of fun for us to discuss, because I didn't realize how complicated it could be with the different lines and the loyalties and pledges and everything else. So I think the politics that are visible in this, and then knowing where it plays into with Third Age, is going to be real interesting.
And politics is going to be a really interesting thing there also. Because, of course, it's another thing that we need to remember. Just as we have the Éowyn story, right, as this sort of centerpiece of the Rohan story in The Lord of the Rings, we also have the Wormtongue story as a really important element. This story of divided loyalties from within Rohan and betrayal by, trusted people. We're going to get something that is going to be like that, right? Something that will be interesting to put next to the story of Grima as we're given it in the book. And, of course, with both of these things, with the Wormtongue story, the Wormtongue parallel, and the Éowyn parallel, we also, of course, get the pleasure of putting it not just against the book, but also against the Peter Jackson film depiction as well, and having the three of those things kind of in dialogue all with each other, and it's a really interesting and fun situation.
And the more we're talking about politics and what was the main word that we used before? Duty. Loyalty is the thread that's coming through all of that too, because the loyalty element of who's in charge, who do we trust, who do we not, who's turning their back, who's coming back, that is a total core of the action for this. So that will be another good one for us to just take a look at.
Yeah,
who's in charge in this moment, and do we trust them?
Right. Yeah, like leadership and yeah.
Motivation and ego. I mean, there's so many big themes that we're familiar with that I think are at play in a lot of these guys. And I would say, if I can lay in a little bit of review, 75% of it I had no issue with. So good, just real interesting. And it's not one that I watched and was immediately like, oh crap, we have to talk about this for a long time. I was immediately like, I want to see this again. Yeah, this is really interesting, and not just for the visuals, not just for the music, not just for the performances. So each of those things was really interesting to me. There's definitely some stuff that I have issue with, and I don't think was as strong as it could be. But there's nothing that made me want to throw over tables and be like, missed opportunity,
Right.
Yeah, I would say overall, there's a lot of fun stuff for us to talk about. A lot of really interesting adaptation choices and questions, and also a lot of structural stuff that I think it'll be fun to talk to you and Kirsten about, Viking sagas and how those stories are told, what that does to a community, the importance of that story in building structure and principles and all those things, and how we're seeing that in this world. It feels like it's very much like I would use this in a class to teach, modern Viking retellings.
Right. Yeah. Ms. Manrico's asking, how do you think those disliked elements, the elements that you dislike, tried to tie into the overall story? She says.
Oh, that's hard to talk about without giving stuff away. There were two characters that did nothing for me, and I struggle with that because then I find them really distracting.
Right.
So like, and you can probably think of this with any book that you read. Like there are just characters that take up screen time that I'm annoyed at because why are you on screen when I want more of that? So
Right.
if they had been removed, I might have gotten even more depth to Hera, which I was craving. So I like what I got. I'm not slamming Hera, but these two characters distracted rather than built up. And it's like anything. If you're going to have them on screen, they need to serve a purpose. Like they have to work. So I want them to put the work in, not just be, because when something's just comic relief, like you get it. But there is comic relief in this, but it serves a purpose. It does something. So I quite like it when all the things work.
Yeah.
And I mean like work as in like heavy lifting, not as in play out.
Right. Yeah. When they're accomplishing things. Well, I mean, and you figure like they knew they were trying to accomplish something. So when you say they're not accomplishing anything, most likely what that means is that what they were attempting to accomplish with them wasn't landing with you. Right.
Well, in one of them, you could kind of see, like, I was waiting for a reveal. I mean, it was being built up as if there was going to be a big deal, and then there wasn't a big deal. So, like, that was real annoying because, like, you built this up to be a thing, and now it's not a thing.
Right.
Whereas the other one, I feel like, was just a sweet character that they couldn't kill their darlings. Like, I can see how you would be attached to this and think that it would be maybe a hook for an audience member, and maybe it will be for some, but to me served no purpose. So I just got distracted by them. And then there were just a couple of like story plot holes that bothered, but didn't disrupt.
Okay.
I'll leave it there. We'll discuss after.
We'll discuss more. Yeah.
We'll discuss more later. Yeah.
Definitely. Good. Well, I'm hoping to see. I'll get to see it this weekend, right? I'm hoping to see it this weekend.
I'm going to see it a second time.
This weekend won't be the time when we do what I think we're going to have to do, which is like go to a theater one day and buy tickets for every showing and just watch it like 4 times in a row.
But see, this is also where the problem comes in that I live in Bumble Nowhere, North Wales.
Yes.
So Sarah Brown, who a lot of you know from Signum, lives 15 minutes down the road from me. There's one theater that is playing it Friday, Saturday, Sunday this weekend. And that's it.
Okay.
So we're going on Sunday. And then I'm going to have to travel to see it again and again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll see. I should have a little bit more access than that, but I will. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see when that's able to happen. But
I do think that we
good.
should pretend that we're all watching it together. So everybody, like by everybody, I mean you, me, Ben, Kirsten. So
Yes.
the 4 of us watch it on our own once or twice, and then we come together and don't watch it together, but maybe we all meet immediately after seeing it and we can actually talk through it.
Yeah. No, that would be good. That would be good.
It's gonna be fun. And I just can't wait for you guys to see the visuals too. Like it's just astounding what they're able to accomplish with some of these scenes. It's such a neat way to see Middle Earth. And the sound design too was the other thing that really struck me. I'm so glad I saw it in a big theater first because everything shook during those battles. Like I could feel the blood pumping in my veins. It was so like, oh.
Yeah.
Sound design is awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that. I hope I will get a chance to see it this weekend. I've got so many broadcasts going on this weekend.
I know you're a little busy this weekend.
I am a little busy this weekend. Yeah. But I should Sunday. I probably is my best day, most likely for getting in the theater. But yeah, we'll see.
Try to fit that in. And we'll connect after.
It should be good. I saw someone asking earlier on if we're gonna do Christmas episodes this year as we've done the last few years, and it's hard with major Tolkien adaptation dropping in the holiday season like this to
But I
time.
also don't think we should talk about War of the Rohirrim until people have had a massive chance to see it, right?
Right.
So like, so do we talk about War of the Rohirrim next week, which is right after it's come out, and then we do a Christmas one, or do we swap that around? Because
Maybe
there's
we
only two
swap.
weeks. I think we do too. So do we do Christmas next week, and then War of the Rohirrim on the
It makes more
23rd?
sense because then we would give people more of a chance to see the War of the Rohirrim before we talk about it in detail.
And we'll be 2 weeks into development, and the Kickstarter will be underway. We can probably give you guys some more updates about what's going on with that project. It feels wrong because we should be talking about Christmas on the 23rd,
Kind of seems that way.
but I think you're right,
Yes. Yeah.
schedule wise.
Or alternatively, we could wait until the 30th to talk about the War of the Rohirrim, but that feels like a while.
It does. Let's plan
Challenges.
for, yeah, let's plan for not War of the Rohirrim next week. So either way, we'll do Christmas next week.
Yeah.
Do we have, we're talking about this now, guys. Do we have a film in mind that you
That's
want to
right.
talk about?
Yeah. People have suggestions. People have suggestions of what you'd like to see us do and to talk about. I think it was really interesting to choose particular moments.
Yeah.
I would kind of like to do more sort of close analysis. Again, I think we did openings. Didn't we do openings with the Christmas
Yeah,
Carol?
we did Christmas Carol, 2 episodes, 6 versions, and then we did openings
Yeah.
of different.
Yeah.
Trying to think of a key moment or favorite Christmas films. Oh,
Yeah, I mean,
did
if we're thinking of, I mean, specific adaptation and storytelling methods and moments, maybe we pick a moment. I mean, Christmas Carol is
easy,
is easy
joy.
and fun, and we've done it lots of times before. So we've established, like a set
Corporate.
of adaptations that we can go back to. The thing I would be interested to look at there, a moment that suggests itself as a really interesting moment for storytelling mechanisms between the book and the films would be the Ghost of Christmas to Come, the Christmas Future ones. I suggest that for a couple of reasons. One, because that's a very dramatic moment. Like, that's the turning point moment in the sense, not in the sense of, because that's the other thing that we looked at, right? We looked at like the moment when Scrooge wakes up and changes his mind, right? Those scenes we've looked at in some detail before. But anyway, but the Christmas Yet to Come moments are intrinsically dramatic, right? And so how is
that moment? Yeah.
yeah, and like designed to be emotionally charged moments. What emotions are being rallied and how? Like, by what mechanisms are they being rallied? By what techniques of verbal and visual storytelling are we being worked upon, right, by the authors and writers in those particular moments? But yeah, so we did Scrooge's moment of realization. I think that, so one vote I would have would be to look at some Christmas Future moments.
I think that would be good because it's so different too how Ghost of Christmas Future does that, but I feel like there's some really similar core themes in their like actions, but the techniques and
Are going to
visuals and all that
vary
stuff is pretty
significantly.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what if we did Ghost of Christmas Future,
Yeah.
and are we going to create a short list of ones we're going to look at, or do we decide that? We've got a big vote for Doctor Who in the
We
chat.
do, though. That one's for this particular scene. It's particularly challenging, actually. It's interesting in that the Doctor Who adaptation of the Christmas Carol kind of inverts the Christmas Yet to Come thing, and it is well, I mean, it's an interesting thing perhaps in itself to talk about. When you have a story that has been adapted and retold so many times that it ceases to be just something that is adapted and becomes a myth that is appealed to and played with.
I mean, like every TV show has done an episode like this. So maybe we just compile some different things to take a look at and be like, look what they're doing here. And
yeah. No, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think we'll reference some of the ones that we've talked about before, because I'm immediately going to the Mickey Christmas Carol and the
Me
Muppet
too.
Christmas Carol.
I was thinking of the Mickey one in my head. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but that's totally different than the Scrooge one, and the early adaptations are going to be completely different. I think that'd be fun. I also just have to comment on Phil's. At some point, we do adaptations of Treasure Island. Yes, but only if we lead with the Muppets. So.
That's the rule. Yeah. Okay.
So, if there's a Muppet version of anything we talk about, I want to talk about it.
I hear you.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. So it's not the most uplifting thing about Christmas to talk about, but it ends with a change of heart, right?
Yeah. So shall we can go back and shall we break it up like we did before? Do that. Everybody can see this is our very spontaneous planning here because we weren't sure about this. Shall we do, before we've done sort of stricter retellings and then the sort of freer spin-offs and adaptation, the more the modulation ones later on, like the Doctor Who one is clearly an example of that. Whereas things like the Muppets, the older versions that we've done before, a lot of those are much more sort of strict.
I'm looking up the years because I forget what year we did. Was it 1951 that we did the old one?
I think it's the one with the iconic Tiny Tim on his shoulder moment.
I think it was.
Remember that visual image that was on the award that was given in Scrooged, right? Yes.
I think that was 1951. Well, maybe we do that one, Muppet Christmas Carol, Mickey Christmas Carol.
Mickey, definitely Mickey.
As our close.
Yeah.
I don't really want to talk about the Jim Carrey one, but maybe we just show a visual of the Jim Carrey one. I didn't like that one just because I didn't think it was very well done, but I think it had a pretty striking Christmas future.
Yeah. Okay. So let's stick with since we've been doing this already for several years, let's stick with those films that we've done before. Yeah. The Bill Murray one is Scrooged that we were referring to, Phil. And I think we do
did
that
last year, didn't we?
Yeah, we've done Scrooged a couple times when we've done these different things. So let's look at Christmas Future, and we'll start with the book, and then we'll look at some of the let's do the 1950s one, Mickey and the Muppets.
Yep.
Next time, and then we'll look at some of the modulations for next time, like Scrooged and Doctor Who and Spirited, which we've talked about before. Yeah.
I'm like, I loved that one. Yeah. Any excuse to watch that again. That sounds good. So yeah, let's plan to do those the next 2 weeks. But if we need to interject with some, we might need to do 15 minutes of War of the Rohirrim just because you will have seen it and I want to talk to you about it.
Yes.
And you guys probably want to eavesdrop on that.
We can't promise no digressions onto War of the Rohirrim at any point, but
I also feel like I just have to comment on Meow. What's her full name? In our Meow Indeed. You ages ago in this conversation, you talked about Helm Hammerhand going to Hammer Barn. As the mother of a 3-year-old, I just say, I see you. Thank you for that Bluey crossover. The world didn't know that we needed, but I am here for that.
So, so you're saying that Bluey should do Helm Hammerhand adaptation?
I mean, I wouldn't put it past Bluey. Those episodes are way more sophisticated than anybody gives them credit for. It's like the Animaniacs. Do you remember when Animaniacs did Les Mis and just blew everybody's mind? Like, if Bluey did Helm Hammerhand, I would not be surprised, and it would be beautiful. So it would probably make me cry and cheer all at the same time. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Excellent. Yes.
Okay, so we'll do classic adaptations next week, but also a little bit of War of the Rohirrim so we can actually geek out a little bit. And then we'll dig into the looser adaptations.
Very good. Very
Yay.
good. Awesome. Good plan.
And then we'll talk about War of the Rohirrim for real.
Then we'll talk about War of the Rohirrim after we've both seen it and processed it and thought through it a bit more.
And have drafted our scripts for the documentary.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Very good. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we will see you guys next time. It's Christmas season again, so we'll go back to the Christmas Carol next week. So that'll be fun. All right. Thanks everybody. Bye now.